We're now about 4 months into Zoran Mamdani's term as New York City mayor, and things seem to be going pretty well. Mamdani's profile, in both New York and the rest of the world, has continued to grow, and polling suggests he's remarkably popular. A Siena poll from earlier this month, for instance, found that 56% of New Yorkers view him favourably, while 34% view him unfavourably, giving him a net approval rating of plus 22, higher than that of any other well-known New York politician. Similarly, a Marist poll from April put his net approval rating at plus 18 and found that more than half of New Yorkers think the city is on the right track, up 25 points when compared to late 2025, when Mamdani's predecessor, Eric Adams, was seeing out his term. These are pretty good numbers in and of themselves, but they're especially impressive when you take into account the fact that Mamdani is a self-described democratic socialist, generally seen as a disadvantage in US politics, and that basically every other well-known American politician is currently underwater in the polls. So in this video, we thought we'd try to figure out what Mamdani is apparently doing right, and whether there might be some lessons for other politicians here. This map shows all of the places Trump has launched military offensives since returning to the White House last year. But how did we reach this point? In the latest issue of our magazine, we run through a timeline of Trump's military chaos across the world. That's just some of 80 pages in the magazine though, because there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So the first thing that seems to be working for Mamdani is his relentless focus on tangible outcomes, what are sometimes called bread and butter issues. Other left-wing politicians sometimes focus more on questions of ideology rather than delivery. In other words, what they think rather than what they do. In his first few months in office, Mamdani has focused squarely on what his government is actually doing. For instance, he's made a lot out of the fact that his administration filled in more potholes in its first 100 days than any of its predecessors. He does endless photo ops picking up trash and announced last month that his administration would be expanding the containerization program, which sounds fancy but basically just means using big bins. And while they haven't happened yet, Mamdani's other big policies, like fast and free buses and state-run grocery stores, are very tangible and easy for the average voter to understand or imagine. Mamdani himself describes this style of politics as pothole politics, and frames it as the ideological successor to the so-called sewer socialism of the early 20th century. For context, sewer socialism was an American socialist movement centered around the city of Milwaukee, in the state of Wisconsin. The sewer socialists of the 19th century were less fussed about overthrowing capitalism and more fussed about improving municipal public services, like parks, schools, and, you guessed it, sewers. The sewer socialists were remarkably successful in electoral terms. In the 1900s, no American city saw as many socialist electoral successes as Milwaukee. Interestingly, when the term sewer socialism was first coined in the early 1900s, it was intended as a pejorative. It was used by more ideologically minded socialists to criticize what they saw as the pedestrianism of the Milwaukee socialists, who were always boasting about the public sewer system. You could imagine similar arguments playing out in the Democratic Party today. High-minded leftists, for instance, might dismiss Mamdani's more attention-grabbing policies, like the World Cup ticket lottery, as gimmicks that distract from the more ambitious policies he proposed during the campaign, like universal childcare. For their part, Mamdani and his supporters would probably argue that these sorts of hyper-visible initiatives build public trust in government and its ability to actually do things. Public trust in government is in short supply at the moment, and is also probably a precondition for the more sweeping left-wing policies that high-minded left-wingers generally favour, given any meaningful reorganising of the economy would first require the public to willingly hand over more of its resources to the state. This focus on tangible policy goals also makes it easier for Mamdani to justify his desired tax hikes, because the question moves from who should give the government more money to who should pay for things like pothole repairs, big bins, and fast buses. It's a lot easier to justify tax hikes, on the rich or anyone else, when voters are asking the latter question rather than the former. Anyway, the second thing that seems to be paying off for Mamdani is what we might describe as his legislative pragmatism. For context, Mamdani campaigned on a pretty ambitious policy platform that included universal childcare, an interventionist housing policy, and those fast and free buses we just mentioned. During the campaign, a lot of people predicted that Mamdani would struggle to actually implement or fund these policies. This was in part because the mayor alone doesn't actually have that many fiscal powers, and any large tax increases would require approval from both the state legislature and the governor. But it was also because it was hard to imagine Mamdani cooperating with these other power centres. While both the state legislature and the governorship are controlled by Democrats, these Democrats, including Governor Kathy Hochul, mostly come from the centre or the right of the party, and were originally sceptical of Mamdani's leftist credentials. There was thus some expectation that, once he'd got into office, Mamdani would immediately butt heads with the rest of New York's political establishment, leading to legislative deadlock. However, that's not how things have panned out. Mamdani has turned out to be a more pragmatic legislator than many people expected, and in his inaugural budget, the new mayor accepted a series of compromises in order to find agreement with Hochul, with whom he's developed a surprisingly chummy working relationship. This obviously meant Mamdani didn't get everything he wanted. In fact, the budget was pretty conservative, but he at least got some stuff, including $1.2 billion towards his pledged expansion of public childcare. While some more left-wing voters might see this as selling out, in the round, accepting a compromise and getting something is probably better politics than grandstanding and getting nothing. You also saw this in Mamdani's relationship with Trump. He put aside their political differences in pursuit of a working relationship. There are arguably some parallels here with Argentina's Javier Milei. During the presidential campaign, lots of people predicted that Milei would be unable to actually enact his radical right-wing policies, given that his party, La Libertad Avanza, only had minimal representation in the Argentinian Congress. But Milei ended up being a more pragmatic legislator than expected, forming temporary political alliances with other parties in Congress to help squeeze policies through. Milei wasn't able to get everything done all at once, but he was nonetheless able to make surprisingly good progress on his legislative agenda. And this is one of the main reasons that, until recently, he was so popular. The third thing that seems to be working for Mamdani, and the last thing on our list, is his relentless optimism. This is attractive in and of itself, but it's also a comparative reminder of quite how pessimistic the rest of politics has become. There are legitimate reasons for this pessimism. The world does seem like it's going to hell in a handbasket sometimes, but this has created both the space and the demand for more positive politics, which Mamdani has capitalised upon. The latest issue of our magazine, Too Long, is out now, and if you want our best value ever, subscribing and using the code SUMMER26 gets you your first copy for as cheap as £4.99, as well as 20% off as long as you stay subscribed. I actually told you about one of the articles in this edition of the magazine at the start of this video, but this issue's also jam-packed with other content from all around the world. Obviously, the headline section is our rundown of Trump's wars around the world, discussing all of the different countries and regions which have faced Trump's military wrath, going nation by nation through the timeline, and reaching the ultimate question, has Trump launched a modern holy war? From there, we dive into our regional sections, starting with the UK, where we unpack the results of the recent May elections, take a look at the UK's odd foreign posture, and discuss whether Britain has become ungovernable. Then in the EU section, we discuss how Russia's sphere of influence is fading, why Europe's energy transition isn't what you expect, and also look at the Euro's missing members. Finally, in the global section, we discuss if we're seeing echoes of the First World War, what's next for Iran, as well as what really came from the Gen Z protests we saw emerging last year. But that's not even everything. With this 80-page issue, our joint longest ever, there's even more to read than I've even been able to mention here. So click the link in the description to learn more and grab your copy of Too Long today.